Hello, testing. 1, 2, 3.
Hey, how you doing, love mama? Let me whisper in your ear.
Hi, my name is Trish, and in this video I will be talking about the books that I read for the PhilMyth Readathon. This readathon was created by the ever-amazing Gerald from Gerald the Bookworm and co-hosted by everyone's favorite Tita, Kate from Your Tita Kate, and the lovely as always Julian from Love Julian. The PhilMyth Readathon was inspired by Filipino mythical creatures, and each creature represented a prompt. I planned to read 6 books for this readathon, but who was I kidding? There was no way I could read 6 books in the span of 11 days. I did, however, get to read 3 books, and I like all of these 3, so that's a big win for me. So the first book that I read for this readathon was The Unexpected Everything by Morgan Matson. I read this for the prompt Tikbalang, a book with a land animal on the cover. I'm just gonna read the synopsis from my notes because The Unexpected Everything follows our main protagonist, Andy, as she struggles to keep her life in order after a scandal involving her famous politician dad upends her plans for the summer. She ends up becoming a dog walker and meets this guy, and things start to get interesting for her. So I'm not big on contemporary books, even less so with romantic contemporaries, but I really enjoyed this book. I had a really fun experience reading this. So let me start with the characters. So there's Andy, our main character, and she kind of reminds me of Barbara Gordon, aka Batgirl. She's very organized. She likes to have control over the things that she can control. She likes to plan ahead, and she can be very intense. Growing up as a politician's daughter, she was trained to live in a way that presents the best optics as much as possible so that she doesn't negatively affect her father's political career. And so this kind of leads her to develop some unhealthy habits when dealing with situations and even with relationships. An example of this is when she found out that a friend has started dating this guy who is also the crush of another friend, and this particular friend who's dating the guy has been keeping the relationship a secret for months now. And instead of encouraging this friend to just come clean and tell the truth to their other friends, she sort of enables the secrecy and tells her friend to just keep the relationship low-key until the guy eventually goes back to college and he won't be there anymore to cause any troubles. And if their friends ever do find out, at least the relationship's ended by then, so it won't be as messy. So from that situation, we sort of see how Andy has been hot-wired to prioritize saving face in every situation. And it really has something more to do with her upbringing, being a politician's daughter, rather than who she really is, which is really sad because we get glimpses throughout the book that she doesn't want to be like that or to have to resort to troubleshooting to save face. The next character that I'm going to talk about is Clark, the love interest. And Clark was not very impressive. He was not memorable for me. He was just there, and I appreciate the effort to make him more interesting and to kind of elevate him from the stereotypical nerdy guy trope. But personally, I just didn't find anything that made him stand out for me. Before doing this video, I actually had to go back to the book and browse through it to find his name because I couldn't remember his name. He was that forgettable. Who's a radical representation of the nerdy guy trope? Kevin, the jellyfish catcher from SpongeBob.
I was busy thinking about
There was this one particular scene with Clark that I found strange. It was that scene where Andy was sharing something about her family, and she said that organization was the coin of the realm in her family, and Clark didn't understand her. He didn't understand what coin of the realm meant. And I found that strange because Clark is this sort of literary prodigy. He's just 19 years old and he's published 2 fantasy books, which I assume are set in the medieval times, what with mentions of castles and princesses and sword fights and elders. And a quick Google search showed that coin of the realm is a phrase that's been used since the 18th century. And I don't want to sound pretentious or condescending, but a fantasy writer who doesn't know what coin of the realm means. I mean, Andy used it in a sentence. I think it was pretty easy to sort of gauge what Andy meant. I don't know, maybe I'm just nitpicking Clark because I didn't like him. Next, I'm going to talk about Andy's friends, and I'm not going to say each of their names because there's 5 of them and I can't remember them all. But I really liked how each of them were given these stereotypical roles. And as the story progressed, they were given more depth and character. And by the end of the book, they were each their own person, and they were each definable outside of just being Andy's friends. So that was really nice. I also found their camaraderie and their dialogue very believable and realistic. So realistic to the point that there was this one scene where I was so annoyed because they were talking over each other, and people talking over each other is one of my greatest pet peeves. It gave me war flashbacks to when I was with my friends and everyone was talking over each other, and I just wanted to tear the pages out and eat them. The story itself is very lighthearted and fun, and surprisingly very multi-layered. So the story is basically 1 part father and daughter reconciliation, 1 part romantic comedy, 1 part friendship story, and 1 part a sort of self-discovery story for Andy. And each part of the story had its own depth and drama, and they just all contributed to this kaleidoscope of a story about a young girl, and it was really good. I just wish I could say the same about the plot. I actually gave this book 3.5 stars out of 5. The huge, if not the only reason, is because of the plot. The plot was very hit or miss for me. There were parts of the book where the plot was well paced, it flowed smoothly, it flowed steadily, it kept the story going, it had events that actually contributed to the story. But most of the book actually are scenes that I personally, and emphasis on personally, think are fillers. I really believe that many of the scenes here could be taken off or omitted from the book, and it wouldn't affect the story in any way. So there's just this huge chunks of events and stories that aren't really important or are not consequential to the story, and it wouldn't have been so bothersome to me, but it was just really clear that the plot was becoming slow and the story was losing its groove because of it. It really affected my overall experience. Like, I did not need to read page after page of Clark and Andy taking care of a sick dog. I also didn't need to read page after page of said dog vomiting over Andy just so she can have an excuse to go to Clark's room and snoop on his things and actually start a conversation with the guy. I just thought there could have been better, more effective ways to have Andy and Clark engage with each other. There are also a couple of notable scenes that I wanted to talk about in the book. These scenes really stood out to me and I just wanted to talk more about them. So there's this scene in page 90 and Andy is talking with Maya, who is her employer in the dog walking business, and Maya has a lot of tattoos and they were talking, and Andy seems to be surprised that Maya knows how to use the word former. So this is Clark talking. Are you a dog walker or do you just have a lot of dogs? And Maya answers him, the former. And this is Andy's thought process. I guess I hadn't expected super proper language from her. It seemed to go against the tattoos. And that line really irked me because I didn't know that language and tattoos were mutually exclusive? Is it because of all the ink? Do people with tattoos lose their vocabulary with every tattoo that they get? Is it one word per needle? I mean, how does this logic work? I just don't get it. Also, there's another scene that really riled me up, and it was when Clark and Andy went on their first date. Take in mind that Andy's backstory here is that she lost her mother 5 years ago. She hasn't found a healthy way of coping with that, and she hasn't had anyone to talk about that. It's understandable that she's hesitant to open up about her personal life, especially her mother. And Clark, on the first date, is kind of expecting her to share and talk about personal things so that he can get to know more about her. And since Andy didn't want to and resorts to just small talk, he sort of gives her an attitude after the date, like, you didn't talk to me about real stuff. And the worst part is that Andy's friends sort of agreed with Clark that Andy has this habit of not talking about real stuff. I mean, it's the first date. Andy barely knows Clark. She literally just found out what his real name was as he was picking her up for dinner. And you guys expect her to open up about her deceased mother on the first date? Like, getting to know people is a privilege. You're not entitled to it, Clark. The next book that I read was Educated by Tara Westover. I read this for the prompt Duende. Read a mass market paperback book. Oh, sorry. So Education is a memoir. It is about a young woman who grew up in a radical Mormon survivalist family. Her parents believe that school and hospitals are government propaganda to brainwash people, and she didn't get a formal education until she was 17 years old. Educated was a very powerful reading experience for me, and it has definitely become one of my favorite books of all time. I don't want to talk too much about it here because there's so much to unpack and dissect about this book, and I want to dedicate a separate review for it. Tara Westover's writing is sublime. She has such a way with words and how she expresses thoughts and emotions and experience in a way that's completely ravaging and really made me think. There were lots of times when I had to pause and put the book down because I had to take the time to just absorb all that I've just read, which is kind of the reason why I wasn't able to read all 6 of the books in my TBR for this readathon. No regrets though.
That's my credo. No regrets.
I wrote my thoughts about Educated because I knew I wouldn't be able to articulate it on camera. So I'm just going to read it and hope I sound human. One of the things that really struck me with this memoir is that Tara Westover didn't go out of her way to demonize her parents and her family. And after all she'd been through, I honestly wouldn't blame her if she did. She didn't paint them as inherently evil people. In fact, throughout the book, she's made this emphasis that her family believe what they believe and they act the way they act because they don't know any better. And while this does not excuse their actions and does not excuse the gross enabling of Sean's abuse, Sean being Tara Westover's older brother, it opens up the discussion that people's beliefs and principles are not hotwired into their DNA. They are learned and absorbed from the kind of people and environment they're exposed to or grew up in. And this leads to an understanding that people can be taught and that people can change. Tara Westover herself talks of how hard it was at first to come to grips with the fact that most of the things she grew up believing were not correct, and some of them were very harmful. But by opening herself up to learning, she was able to correct herself. I really cannot give justice to how good this book is and how much of an impact it had on me as a reader. There are just times when you read a book and it hits you differently and it hits you hard. And I know it's corny to hear, but reading this book really was very eye-opening and sort of life-changing. It was just a really good book. And the last book that I read for this readathon was Heretics Anonymous by Katie Henry. I read it for the prompt Bungisngis. Read a comedy book. Heretics Anonymous follows this group of outcasts who attend a Catholic school, and they form this secret organization where they can practice their own faith and find support and acceptance. So there's Michael, an atheist. There's Lucy, who's Catholic. There's Abby, who's Jewish. There's Max, who's a Unitarian, and there's Eden, who's a Celtic reconstructionist polytheist. Got it on the first try. And together, these young people start to challenge and question the prejudice and discrimination and hypocrisy in their school. I really liked this book, but I guess I'm a bit disappointed that I didn't like it as much as I thought I would, and I'm doubly disappointed that a big reason why was because the main character is one of the biggest jerks that I've had the misfortune of reading about. But let me start from where it makes sense. So the story itself it's interesting, it's different, it's compelling, it's thought-provoking. It talks about heavy and sensitive issues about faith and religion and tolerance and acceptance. The plot was very well paced, it was fast, and it steadily drove the story forward, but still left space and opportunity for the characters to grow and gain more depth. The characters themselves were very interesting and compelling. I really liked their interactions and their camaraderie. It was a very integral part to the story, and it really added to the development of not only the story but also to themselves, because really the heart of the story is that these 5 young people gathered to just be themselves around each other without judgment. And then there's Michael, the main character. He is a jerk. I'm sorry. I don't know what else to call him. He's a jerk. He's also the biggest asshole when it comes to other people's faith and religions. And that's coming from someone who is also a non-believer. I just can't understand why Michael has to instigate these heated debates about faith and religion with people who practice said religion. And what bothers me so much is that he doesn't start these debates or talks because he wants to learn more or understand more about it, but usually he starts these fights because he said something stupid and tactless and really hurtful about someone's faith or religion. There was this one scene where he called Catholics mindless sheep. Like, everyone is entitled and allowed to have their own opinion about faith and religion, but to go out of their way to air out these opinions to people who practice their faith and religion is another level of douchebag that I don't want to associate myself with. So aside from Michael's blatant assholery, there is also the problem of... This is the part where I don't know how to talk about it. I can't articulate myself because even I'm having a hard time trying to flesh out these thoughts as to why I'm so bothered about this particular characteristic of Michael's, but I will try to explain in the best way that I can. So Michael has this romantic attraction to Lucy, and let's remember that this book is set in first person point of view, so we're basically in his mindset, we're basically following his train of thought, and I can't understand why every time he has a moment to be introspective about his attraction towards Lucy, it comes off as shallow and purely sexual. And let me make it clear, I am not a prude. I like reading about sex in books. I am a hoe for fictional sexy time. I am thirsty for that good smut. But my problem with Michael's more carnal thoughts towards Lucy is that it doesn't sort of fit with his character or the events where he's sort of projected these carnal thoughts. Let me try to make things more understandable. In most of the books that I've read, when there's a scene where a character starts to feel or think something sexual or carnal, there's usually a precedent to it, or something happened between them and the love interest to provoke these thoughts or feelings. That's my point. There's always something to provoke these thoughts, and yet for Michael's case, they just seem to pop out of nowhere. This is me defending a character that I don't even like, because there are many scenes in the book where Michael interacts with Lucy and he becomes introspective, and the thoughts are not sexual or carnal at all. And yet when he has these moments scenes where he has to specifically think about his relationship with Lucy, he can't seem to provide any thoughts aside from sexual attraction to Lucy. And what bothers me more is that this book was written by a female author, and yet this is the first time that I have been genuinely bothered by how a male character thinks towards their love interest. And I swear I'm not trying to make a big deal about this. I'm just trying to understand why I was bothered, because it really did make me uncomfortable. Every scene where Michael had to think about Lucy made me uncomfortable. And the funny thing is, Michael's carnal thoughts didn't come naturally for him. It actually read like a sort of reminder that, hey, in case you forgot that Michael was a guy, here's a random sexual thought about Lucy. No, I've gone on a very long rant about why I didn't like Michael. Let me at least end this on a more positive note. What I really liked about the book, and one of its strongest elements, is that it opens up the discussion on discrimination involving faith and religion. And it's interesting because the story shows how these 5 outcasts are treated because they practice different faiths and have different religions. But within their circle, even they sometimes can avoid having misconceptions, sometimes innocent, sometimes very harmful misconceptions about each other's faiths. There's this one scene where Max and Eden sort of want to challenge the dress code because they've been reprimanded for wearing earrings with pagan symbols or wearing cloaks, which is really weird because cloaks are cool. And Abby and Lucy really don't see the importance of it. They say that it's just a small thing, why would you let it bother you? And Max says that's exactly it, is a small thing, and we can't even have that small thing, the small freedom of just wearing an earring or wearing a cloak. And so it opens up the discussion that just because something isn't important to me doesn't mean that it's not important to other people. There's just a lot of scenes where it tackles tolerance, it tackles acceptance, it even tackles that complex relationship between a person and the faith or lack thereof. Religion is a really big part of a lot of people's lives, but at the same time, you can't really judge a person solely on their religion. Like, human beings are complex, and not even a religion thousands or millions of years old can encompass a single person. People are multi-layered, and you can't just assume they're this kind of person by the faith that they practice. Bad and good people can come out of any kind of religion. So that is it for the books that I read for the PhilMyth Readathon. I'm pretty proud that I was half productive. I'm really hoping you guys are being more productive than I am during this quarantine. Till the next video.